Banania. Nerds in Paradise. Gerda von Strudel groaned and turned over in her bed, dragging the pillow over her weary head. However long she lived in this small apartment in this tiny town of Vreeswijk in the Netherlands, she still couldn't get used to being loudly and rudely awakened by a church bell at painfully close proximity. She was pretty sure that it would have been outlawed long ago in her native Germany or somewhere equally civilized. Of course, living in Amsterdam, where Ubersnack, her fledgling startup, had its minute kitchen and office, would be more convenient and almost certainly quieter. But finding somewhere affordable to live there was, of course, impossible, which made her tedious daily commute almost worthwhile. As she dragged herself bleary-eyed from her bed, her attention was caught by from her mobile. An early morning email had arrived. Gerda quickly scanned the mail in case it was some kind of work offer, or an offer for their goods, or even someone looking for a job. But her sense of hopelessness dug itself even deeper as she realised it was just a chatty email from an old business friend who had moved his startup company to a distant Caribbean island. Her robust teeth brushing paused suddenly as, while simultaneously scanning the email, her mind switched to this friend, Nigel Nickleby's, startup. Gerda remembered the last time she had seen him at a meet-up in Amsterdam. She had spotted Nigel in deep conversation with a heavy-set businessman. Then the next moment, poof, they both disappeared completely. Then she remembered that Diggybeat hadn't exactly moved from Amsterdam, but had suddenly vanished off the face of the earth overnight. Then, some weeks later, they announced their reappearance on some remote tropical island. This was all very strange. And now here was a mail from Nigel, whom she had always felt may have had some kind of romantic interest in her. Or at least he seemed to appreciate her solid professional business acumen. And, outrageously, he was now suggesting that she move Ubersnack to join him and his people on their wonderful island in the sun. Or, he suggested, she could at least escape the Dutch drizzle for a couple of weeks and fly over to take a look for herself. Looking outside, her heart sank, as Gerda realised that it was indeed once more raining, which seemed to be the only weather it could do convincingly in this little corner of the globe. Even Stuttgart seemed to have more enthusiastic weather than this. Meanwhile, on Banania, the very same island that Nigel had invited Gerda to visit, things were taking an interesting turn. Herbert Mac Nevis, one-time intern and avid robotics fanatic, had now left Diggybeat and started out on his own. Because of Diggybeat's dramatic success with RoboDog, see episode 15, people started to also knock on Herbert's door, with offers of work and requests for all kinds of, often suspect, projects. But one of the more interesting offers came from a nameless company claiming to be technical advisors to the Bananian government. They told Herbert that CARICOM, the Inter-Island Organisation of Nations, of which Banania was now a proud member, had for some time been voicing concern that the population of some of its member nations were perhaps not looking so happy as they ought to, considering the idyllic settings in which they lived. The representatives of this nameless company wondered if perhaps Herbert could devise some kind of robotic device that would monitor the local people's facial expressions, to verify that the claim didn't apply to the good citizens of Banania, of course. If for some unfortunate reason someone was not smiling, a notice should illuminate on the robot's front panel, extolling the obvious virtues of smiling. So Herbert was at work in his now converted chicken shed, attempting to fulfill his first real order for 4 life-sized smile monitoring robots. Meanwhile, a few thousand feet above him, Gerda von Strudel found herself looking down on the sun-soaked island of Banania as it slid reluctantly beneath the wing of her airplane. Her thoughts drifted back 3 dreary Dutch weeks earlier to Nigel's email, and his description of the wonderful fruit and spices all growing in abundance on their island. That was a real reason for her travelling all this way, to take a supposed 2 weeks vacation, especially as she believed that vacations were only for people who had nothing better to do with their time, and Gerda certainly did. Ubersnack, Gerda's little start-up company, developed and handmade sustainable food products for the serious snacker. And that took up all Gerda's waking and occasionally sleeping hours. Unfortunately, finding good quality, organically grown ingredients in Europe was becoming increasingly difficult, as huge multinational corporations took over the supply lines. Prices went up as quality sank to unacceptable. On Banania, Gerda hoped to find farmers and small producers who could supply what she needed to keep her precious products rolling out. And she hoped to take the ferry to the island in just a few days' time. As Herbert busied himself, putting the finishing touches to his robots, he had another visit from the unnamed company representatives, with a request for just a small addition. A few days later, a small cluster of slightly green-gilled passengers stumbled from the ferryboat, then weaved their way uncertainly down the jetty. So it happened, as the Digibeat team finished waving Jethro Wilkes, the visiting part-time trainer, goodbye, and began to wander back to the tech node, they were suddenly arrested by their boss, Nigel, shouting loudly at one of the ferryboat's new arrivals. Guten Tag, willkommen, mein lieber Schatz. And Nigel had of course never considered asking his multilingual Dutch colleague for the German translation of "Hello dear lady, welcome," or some other appropriate semi-formal greeting. But rather he trusted to one of his computer's many instant translation apps. The effect was, well, unexpectedly effective. Never having been called anything remotely like that before, super cool and almost pathologically level-headed Gerda von Strudel began to blush furiously and went quite weak at the knees. Fortunately for Gerda, though, this was quite easily dismissed as post-bobbing up and down in an old ferryboat syndrome. But not quite convincing enough to fool Lily Dobson and Paige Payne, who had both been scrutinising the new arrival closely. And some furious Google translating later confirmed their suspicions of what Nigel had called this new woman. As the passengers left the aged jetty, the first thing to greet them was an enormous digital notice board, along with a rather creepy grinning face. Was a notice that read, "You use 9 muscles to smile and 15 muscles to frown. So, smile." Below the smile notice was a long list of names accompanied by a kind of a scoreboard. Against each name was a number, which seemed to change continuously, and a final score which also changed dependent on the first number. The names with a high score rose to the top of the list and were brightly highlighted, while those with a low score sank to the bottom of the list and were highlighted with flashing red letters. As the passengers left the jetty, they were shocked to see their names appear on the list, along with the members of the Diggybeat team. And as they looked in bewilderment, they noticed that their names began to sink lower on the board. Diggybeat's Larry Lemming, who was quicker on the uptake than most people, forced an enormous grimace and witnessed his name shoot up above his colleagues. Quickly he called out, "Hey, somebody's monitoring us. So look, everybody smile for the camera, right?" Looking around, they soon saw the culprit. It stood about the same height as a fairly small person and looked like a robotic refugee from a sci-fi film set. "Herbert!" called out the Diggybeat team together, and immediately they saw their scores plummet. It was at that moment that Bernie Bernard, the grocer, passed by and saw the Diggybeat team. Bernie at this moment was obviously not a happy camper, and he shook his fist at the assembled team. "Yous techies has been and done this to us here. You should be ashamed of yourselves technologizing us like this." But, attempted Nigel, but it was too late. Bernie had stormed off, and as a result of his fist shaking, his name had dropped right down to the bottom of the list. The realization that not everything on Banania was quite so idyllic had helped to temper Gerda's mood, and a bewildered look on the Diggybeat team's faces jolted her into well-disciplined action. "Excuse me for interrupting, but I feel that I should maybe be introducing myself. For those of you who may not remember me from Amsterdam, my name is Gerda von Strudel, CEO and CTO of Ubersnack." Well, dutifully the team sprung into action and formed a ragged line to be formally introduced to the somewhat intimidating little lady. As she stood in line waiting for her obligatory handshake, Secretary Lily Dobson thought back to another very different arrival in the middle of the night some time ago. Only that was at Manta Ray Bay and was shrouded in mystery. You really ought to listen to episode 1 if you haven't already done so for the full story. That was when Lily had first met the most handsome man she had ever seen, and the look in Nigel's eyes had caused her heart to miss a whole lot of beats. And now